So my soul was getting its identity from what I was doing. And I was doing the things God wanted me to do, actually in the way that God had wired me to do them, which seemed really unfair that I was being sort of challenged over the way he made me. But the way he made me was in control. That was the issue. My soul needed to know. My soul needed to do those things for validation. And my soul was getting its validation identity from what it was doing. Now my identity came from who God said I was and from my relationship with him rather than what I was doing. But of course, I was able to do way, way more than I was doing before, but from a different perspective and from a completely different framework of thinking. And now I didn't need to do anything to show who I was. I knew who I was and got to know who I was at a deeper level purely through heart-to-heart sort of communication with the Father, who revealed my sonship and revealed my identity and showed me, how I was living was not how he intended me to live. And eventually that led into the multidimensional way of being able to be operating multiple dimensions in multiple places at all at the same time. But I couldn't do that when my soul was tethered to my spirit in such a way that the soul had dominion. Although my spirit was strong, the soul still had dominion because it was tethered. And if my chose to come out of heaven, my spirit had to come with me because it wasn't connected in such a way that I could be there in two places. But everyone's experience is probably different. Everyone's what they need separation from or for is different, and everyone's redemptive gift is different. So the things that are, who they really are and how that's at work would be different. So some people would be servants, some people would be rulers, some people would be givers, some people would be grace, mercy gift, and therefore what they were doing was tied to who they were, but they still may have been getting identity from their mercy acts or from their giving or from their understanding, in a sense. My prophetic teaching redemptive gift led me to want to understand how everything worked and want to teach people to understand it. That was how I was wired, but I was getting my identity from that rather than who God said I was. So that's what had to fundamentally change. But it was, everyone's different, and everyone's journey is different. And for me, this was triggered when God invited me into a process of taking me into a consummation of our relationship in intimacy. He took me from the garden of my heart to the dance floor, to the soaking room, to the bridal chamber. And this was the soaking room part. I'd gone through the sense of knowing I was loved. I'd gone through the sense of connecting with my destiny, but I needed this preparation so I could live in a way which enabled me to fulfill who I was, which I would have never have done without that separation and reintegration. Everything changed really at that moment in a huge way. And then I went on another, journey of deconstruction eventually. I had 4 years really that God sort of prepared my heart in that intimacy of revelation of him, of who I was, to get me to the point where I was willing to allow total deconstruction of my belief systems, which were based on my upbringing and my religious programming and everything else. I needed that intimacy level so that I would be able to let go of everything that I thought was true. So God just took me on this journey, and there was many different milestones and things on the journey that brought me to the place. It wasn't just one, but the dark cloud, which went from November to February 2011 to 12, was one of the most significant points on my journey that changed me dramatically in terms of the separation, soul and spirit, and becoming whole and one. And then I opened up my spirit, soul and body to work together for the revelation of the Merkaba and the energy gates and all of that, which I had no idea about back in 2011, 12. But it was all part of God's, I guess, plan to bring me into maturity. And I needed to be transformed, have my mind renewed, and have this sort of level of intimacy and that he wanted me to enter into. So eventually I did get to see God face to face. I did enter into the bridal chamber, if you like, and met him at a whole different level. Initially, even that, it was like a fraction of a second, because it was like so bright and overwhelming and amazing that I couldn't cope. But eventually I now dwell there. I could manage a microsecond initially, and 10 years later I'm dwelling in that light of perfection, face to face, all the time. So there's been a huge shift in my ability to be able to live and dwell in the manifest presence of God, and in his person and who he really is, in that sense. So it's been a long journey, but I look back and see the dark cloud, and that whole journey was a big thing, and eventually I did a whole conference on it, sort of intensive conference on the dark cloud as part of the Sun's Arise series of conferences. And there was a whole thing of going through what that dark cloud was, and all of what it meant for me, and help other people experience it for themselves when God was wanting to take them through it. I don't think it's the same for everyone or the same time for everyone. It's when it is, now hearing my testimony, hopefully people will surrender quicker than I did, and that's the thing here. I didn't know what was going on, and it was like I resisted and fought against it, rather than giving in and surrendering quickly. It took me weeks, 6 or 7 weeks or so to surrender. If I knew what was going on, I probably could have surrendered earlier. But actually, that was the point. Was I willing to surrender when I didn't know what was going on? And that was the key for me. For me, that was the issue. I had to come to the point where I don't need to know. And I really meant that. And God knew I meant it. And that was what brought about the change, really.